Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is Member Game Analysis, hosted by ChessDojo and Chess.com and myself. Been doing this for a number of years, and let me just lay out the basic intention. It stayed the same the entire time. I wanted to provide a venue for people to annotate their own games and for me to review those games. The basic premise is my teaching philosophy, which is that the best way to improve is to understand and analyze your own games at a deeper level. There are, in fact, many different ways to improve your game, and we had a great discussion on our Chess Dojo channel called Dojo Talks with Eugene Perlstein, GM Eugene Perlstein, a couple weeks back. You can find that on our YouTube channel. In any case, this is my philosophy, and let's call it it's the old school philosophy too. It is very difficult, however, to review your own games, and it takes some practice to do so. It is not a habit you just kind of pick up and you're instantly good at. And one cool thing about the show is we have all of the annotations that have been submitted over the years archived on chess.com. If you just go to chess.com and Google my name, you can find both past shows and the upcoming show if you want to submit a game. But in the past shows, what you can really see is that's amazing is you can see many people submitting at least one game a month for many months, sometimes years, and you can see the progression in the ability they have to talk about their games. So we are going to start with somebody who's been on the show for years, and that's Vishnu. And it's kind of a funny story. We'll get into it. Anyways, then we have a large section of strategic games, I'm calling them. Just games where there were some very interesting strategical decisions made. And so I kind of lumped them all together. Then we've got two games over down here with where someone won the initiative and then lost it. Then we've got a section on opposite bishops. And then we have loads of Tarash games, kind of a new trend of the opening started by Dubov, and then we're going to finish off with some Frenches that went bad, usually for black. Okay, so let's begin. We'll begin with Vishnu, and this was just a hilarious game, but also a game I felt that had a lot of depth, for me anyways. So let's get into it. And so just to back up and tell the backstory, Vishnu, who's here, white here as list 85, for years has been talking trash about the London being a kind of setup that's not going to help you grow as a player. And there is a certain amount of sense of saying that, in that if you always play the exact same moves, you will get dumber. But he really went on a tirade about it. And one of the things I think is important, a takeaway for me, is it's true of any opening. If you come to the opening with the same dull assumptions and don't rethink what you're doing, you will become a worse player. And that can really happen if you just play the same moves over and over in Blitz, but also in classical games as well. And one of the things that I'd like to stress from, I want to call it a spiritual level, is that even if you're at a plateau and you're not improving anymore, if you don't look at your games closely and end up playing the same moves over and over, and it will be the same mistakes, that to me is one of the horrors of being a chess player, that we do that. Now, even if you do go over your games, you're still going to have a lot of the same assumptions and make the same kinds of mistakes. But what I'm trying to say is by going over your games, you can rethink your positional understanding. And that's one of the beauties, I think, of what I'm going to propose. What I propose in this show as the way to improve is it's in a lot of ways not just about improving, though that's certainly at the heart of it. It's about extending your appreciation of the game. Okay, so here we go. d4, knight f6, bishop f4. I've never understood this. The the London players have their own rationalizations for doing this, but to me, it's knights before bishops. Come on, they have all kinds of reasons that they tell me whenever we go over this. In any case, let's get into it. Many different setups, and Vishnu's opponent here chooses b6. Now, Vishnu's opponent is very interesting. She goes by the mysterious name of Eyelash. And Vishnu, is playing in a dojo tournament, a chess dojo round robin, where he is playing up. And, in these COVID times, it's hard to say what anybody's rating is. But before it all, Vishnu was somewhere around 1900, and Eyelash is around 2200. So he is definitely the underdog in this matchup. And I think he had, in addition to trying to make a dubious philosophical point against me by playing the London, I'm pretty certain he had some setups that he expected to go against and not this one. Okay, so let's get into it. Right. And there are a variety of ways to play against the London, of course. And with Black's last move, knight 8 d7, that was the first move someone took a considerable amount of time. By the way, myself and Kostya Kavutsky were analyzing this game live. We have a cool show called Sunday Night Fights. Anybody can be a part of that if they just join a dojo tournament. And so a lot of the reflections I have on this game are, based on that experience, and Kostya had a couple nice remarks about this game too. So one of the interesting features that I want to say about this game is that the clock very much played a role for white and for black. And to me, it was very strange that Eyelash thought forever on knight 8 d7. I didn't know what else she was going to do. And now Vishnu tanked forever on this move. And I talk a lot of garbage about how openings aren't important. And I really do, for the most part, believe that they're not that important. But here was a moment where, to me, having seen similar positions to this in the London, because I have another student who plays the London, we've spent a lot of time going over his games, and especially in a maneuvering kind of situation like this is where you can get a real practical advantages if you have a feel for the position. Anyways, we had gone over a bunch of his games in similar positions, and I knew that parking the bishop, this guy, on one of these squares was a great building move, because the bishop just wants to get out of the way of both just all kinds of stuff. Later on, it'll get hit with a knight d5. Later, it might get hit with an e5. In fact, black probably is threatening e5 right now because the loose bishop on d3. So this is the first moment where Vishnu tanked, and I was like, Vishnu, buddy, this is not the moment to tank, because you are going to need the time later for when you're going to have to do some heavy calculation. And one of the things about the London is, even though this position might feel quiet, in my experience, the London positions and chess positions in general never stay quiet. The idea of a quiet opening is one of the ridiculous things to me, because the violence might be delayed, but the violence, can't be denied. Okay, so bishop h2. And here, this was an interesting moment where I felt that black didn't understand what her problem was in this position. And that is that the queen on d8 is mildly uncomfortable due to the bishop on h2. Now, do I think white has an advantage here? Maybe. I don't know, hard to, nothing severe, of course. But let me just say, it's like the course of the next couple moves, I feel like Eyelash could have done better by addressing the queen. And I think it's that problem the problem of the queen that induces a later positional mistake. Right? So let's just put the move on the board. The queen's uncomfortable. The queen's uncomfortable on c7. This move in itself I don't think is bad, but just as, let's call it a point of reference or something, a plan that would have been possible to solve the queen, looks a little weird, but would have been something like a6, a4, rook a7, and then queen over. Looks a little weird, but that would be an attempt. All right, let's do this. Queen c7. I don't like Vishnu's next move. Also a bit of a tank. I feel like for a lot of the London players, you just play a4 and see what black does. You know, probably black should play a6, but you just do it. It's a good move. You probably want to do it anyway. So, yeah, Vishnu is tanking pretty good idea at this point. So, rook e1, and you know, so I have a student who plays the London, and he is also drawn to rook e1. And I feel like the problem with rook e1 is the intention seems to be, well, I'm going to play e4. Well, the thing about e4 is it's not clear to me that it's that cool of a thing. In particular, if your bishop were on c1, right, your beautiful London bishop were on c1, then I would say, yeah, e4 makes a lot of sense. But here, the bishop doesn't, let me put it this way, e4 doesn't help any of the white pieces. It might look kind of cool because you're grabbing some space in the center, but pawns aren't people, and it's not helping any of your pieces. So, like I said, I liked a4 better, but in particular, it was too long of a think here. Right, and now black's next move, in itself not terrible, but I feel like it's pointing to this later idea of playing e5, and that is going to occasion what I think is a bad structure for black. And this move e5, I think, has to do with the discomfort that black feels with the bishop looking at the queen. And it's true, it's like black's one problem in the position. And so, to my mind, something like rook c8, queen b8, queen a8 would make a lot of sense, just to get the queen out of dodge and to do something on the long diagonal. Okay, so here we go. Rook fe8. Again, I want a4. Vishnu played queen e2. Maybe a way to say it, too, for Vishnu's benefit is, with a4, you don't know how she's going to respond, and her response will dictate or help you decide where to put the queen. Whereas here, I'm not really sure that the queen wants to go to e2. Okay, here we go. a6, e4. Again, I want a4. And now is where Eyelash plays e5. And I wasn't thrilled, but at this point, it has to be said that I understand that there's some fear. Just as my first reaction, I want to say something like b5 makes a lot of sense. Okay, and that really, I would say Vishnu would want to have stopped b5. But okay, here we go. e5, de, good move. In some of these structures, and this is actually, this will lead to the later joke. In some of these structures, if, say, the bishop were not on h2, then d5 would make a certain amount of sense, especially if you had a4. If you could achieve a4 and d5, it would make a lot of sense to play d5. And what we have there is what I'm going to call the Chigorin structure of the Ruy-Lopez. And Fischer always played DE in those positions, and Kostya turned me on to the fact that nowadays the top GMs are all playing D5 in the Chigorin position. Interesting, because that's the space-grabbing maneuver, and Fischer, of course, I don't know if it's of course, but Fischer did not like space. I did a lecture for the St. Louis Chess Club called Fischer and Space, and he didn't like to grab this space. Anyways, that's a whole different topic. The reason, though, that DE is correct is that D5 in this position would kill the bishop. So this is by all means the correct interpretation, if you like, of the position with DE. To keep the bishop more influential. And it's a joke because later we're going to see a crime that Vishnu commits against his bishop. I was agnostic here about whether Eyelash should play knight e5 or DE. Both sides' knights are a little funny, so I don't know. DE, and now knight c4. Okay, let's call it, I still want a4 in a very dogmatic sense. I want Vishnu to play a4, but let's look at knight c4. It does create a threat on e5, bishop f8, and now a4. Okay. And Eyelash plays g6. Kind of like in the Chigorin, you know, we're repeating ideas. I wasn't 100% on g6. Her move coming up of knight h5 would at least present Vishnu with some questions to answer. But okay, let's do g6. And here Vishnu begins to lose the thread. He plays b3, and I think what Vishnu is motivated by is he wants to stop a later b5, c4. And b3, I think the biggest problem with b3 is that it loses a tempo. And secondary to that, it will allow at some point b5, b4. And this gets to the heart of the point, which I should have mentioned before. The problem with the black structure at the moment is that she is doing double duty on d4, whereas Vishnu gets to control two center squares with pawns. And the issue of b3 is that at some later date, since c3 is now soft, black can think about nudging the pawn off of the d4 square. Okay, now Vishnu's descent into madness is now happening, beginning right here with b3, and up to this point, you know, I've made some small suggestions, but mostly it was time that he spent, and I think it's because of the time and then the psychological stress of being under time pressure that a lot of Vishnu's mistakes now happen. I think in the stream, me and Kostya were thinking, I think Kostya wanted something like bishop c2. Makes a lot of sense to me. Just improve the position. And the bishop is uncomfortable on d3. Vishnu gives rook a d1, fine. The rook might have some future use there, so that's why my intuition is bishop c2. Okay, so knight h5. And here, this moment where, you know, me and Kostya really got on top of Vishnu on this one. We were pretty mean to him. And, you know, Kostya is one of the most gentlest guys that I've known. And he got on him too, and it was kind of interesting in that we had talked about chess and training with Eugene, and one of the ideas of training that we had was to have a teacher who was this bully or a patriarch or a mean guy or whatever you want to say. And he, for example, Eugene had the honor of facing such a mean guy in Gingiashvili as a coach. In any case, the idea would be that the coach would yell at you if you did Vishnu's following crime. And so it was interesting that Kostya's first instinct was to kind of yell at him. Now, before I show the crime, I just want to say, knight h5 is a good practical move because it's going to force white to come to some kind of notion of how to play the position. Kostya rightly, I think, said something like queen c2, bishop f1. You know, just ignore the knight. It's not, you know, it's not such a bad thing. And I predicted, I said to myself while he was thinking, I was like, he's thinking about the crime. He's thinking about the crime. And before I unveil the crime, I should say the other cool thing we had, we were talking in this talk about chess training, is there's an idea of chess culture, which when you first hear it, pertains mostly to chess etiquette, how chess is done, how chess is played, and that's definitely a part of it. But and we talked about this on this show that you can watch on our YouTube ChessDojo channel. And in any case, the idea of chess culture as a training method would be there's certain ways to do things, and in this certain ways to do things, you don't commit the kind of crime that Vishnu is about to do. And when this crime is committed, you have some patriarchal figure who yells at you for at least a week. And here's the crime, G3. One of the worst moves I've ever seen. I don't know, I've probably seen worse. But this was a real screamer. And, right, you know, I'm not sure, too. Oh, by the way, I want to just say something. As a chess fan, something that was amazing about this game to watch for me was both Vishnu and Eyelash were streaming, and Vishnu was mostly silent. You know, I think he kind of is streaming partly as a thing where, you know, people can watch him and see he's not cheating, and you know, that's kind of cool. But he's not saying anything, which if I was doing it, I wouldn't be saying anything either. But Eyelash is sitting there. She's kind of talking the game through. Really interesting. And anyways, I'm not sure she understood that this was a chess crime. And maybe I wasn't watching it close enough. But in any case, what's curious about it is she does go on tilt in the next couple moves. And amazingly, Vishnu is the one who is on top within a couple moves of this crime. And her plan, is going to be bishop c6, queen b7. It makes sense when you think about the bishop being glorious on this diagonal. But it ends up being problematic. Okay, so I'm not even sure what black should do. I didn't even think about it too closely. At some point, we're going to be thinking about f5, putting a rook on d8, yada yada. Fixing the knight on h5 comes to mind, of course, too. Knight g7 can't be a bad move. Okay, so let's look. Queen b7, now a nice move from Vishnu, bishop c4. And all of a sudden, it's not so simple for black. And it's interesting because I think all players have the following kind of experience that Eyelash now has, which is she rightly assumed that she was much better earlier. And now when she got to this position, she said to herself, I'm just putting words in her mouth, that if she doesn't take on e4, that her position is not that special because something like bishop d5 or knight d5 is going to happen. So kind of quickly, she played bishop e4. And now, all of a sudden, this move happens. And as a chess fan, I want to say it was really remarkable to watch Eyelash's stream because I could see what I recognized in a little quickly was the stages of grief. And we've all been there as chess players, the stages of grief where, you know, you go from thinking that you have a beautiful position to then kind of being in denial about the fact that you're in trouble, and what she was then doing was like, oh, but this has got to work, and this has got to work. And it's so interesting because we've all been there, but normally, you know, we don't hear it vocalized by somebody else. You know, it was a really amazing experience. And then slowly it descended into just silence. And it was like, oh God, that's so painful. And I know I think we've all been there. And eventually she had to play bishop c6, which as far as I can tell is the only thing you can kind of do. The problem is not only on f7, but let's say you do rook e7, snip, snop. It's really a slap because you're not just losing the rook, you're losing the queen. So anytime Vishnu gets a take on e4, it's the queen that's going down. So really a bummer. All right, bishop c6. And here Vishnu, it has, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes, something like that. But he does get 30 seconds a move. And here it was time for me and Kosti to go to bed. So we didn't pay too much attention to the rest. But Vishnu's next move, I definitely want to say, is not the move, Vishnu, that you want to play in time pressure. In time pressure, you just want to go like snip, take the thing, and then play either one of these moves. Either one. F3, I guess, is the safest. Your knight will come back to e4. She's going to have to give you her beautiful bishop. Your rook, it was going to come to d1. Her king is weaker, honestly, than yours. At some point, we're going to get this guy out. So, totally winning position. And what Vishnu does is he starts tanking, and then goes crazy with knight f5. And for all I know, this is fine. I mean, it's winning, but it's making it so much more complicated than it needs to be. And this proves to be Vishnu's undoing. Yeah, probably. And Vishnu says the g5 is not correct, but in time pressure, it's already getting kind of weird. And here, I don't know, unless Vishnu has something special, he's no longer on top. Or at least it's no longer clear. So right now, I guess he's close to toast. And it's all over. So really interesting game as a fan, as a spectator, and I think there are several things in there for Vishnu's chess improvement. Clearly, time management will probably be was the biggest factor in determining how this game went. But G3, chess crime, and then making things complicated, more complicated than they needed to be. I think actually when I think about strong players, they are willing to do incredible calculations, but if they have a choice between calculating and keeping things epically simple, they will choose epically simple. And that's one of the key lessons, I think, in the finale there. Okay, so here we go. We're now moving. Let me give a brief update here. We're now moving on to strategic games. And this is Scott, who I believe this is his first time on the show. So I promise to be nice. I don't actually promise. I can't promise. It's a promise I can't fulfill. And so let's check it out. Yeah. Knight f3. Here we go. So check to the miserable king, and now this move, bishop d7. In my experience, knight bd7 is the old-fashioned move, but this is probably playable to do bishop c6. And the issue now with knight b6 is that black is going overkill on the light squares and needs to make sure that c5 happens, the break c5. And in this game, one of the themes of this game, is that black just takes too long to do it. Okay. Good move. Good move. And now rook e1, I think that's also good. Knight here. And now a3. All right. This, by the way, so far, I would say, is a good Catalan game for white. But a3, I want to punish black more than that, and I didn't, I've turned on, by the way, I never turn on the computer with these kinds of things. And that's mostly because I know you can turn on the computer and I just want you to see it through my eyes and I want to be honest, about it. I'm sure I make loads of mistakes. You can call me on it with the computer, that's fine. But anyways, my human move that I'd like to play here is knight e5. With the thought, I think, that knight here, 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 here would be a delicious position for white, with the two bishops and yada yada. And if bishop e5, I'm just assuming that this is also a very nice position. Yeah. So one thing that Vishnu knows about me is that I am into time. I'm into cultivating time and having time. And he dubbed me years ago the tempo fiend. And so, right, a3 I'm not happy with because mostly it's a tempo. And because now maybe the guy lives, and right. One cool move here we can talk about is that clearly you want to play something like knight d2. And we're just going to see that Scott is obsessed with playing knight d2 and e4. And we should say that Black, on his part, is going to be interested in moving the bishop and playing c5 as quick as possible. Or at least that's what he should be interested in doing. So, pawns aren't people, though, and the cool thing about having a pawn on e4 would be that it would dominate the bishop on c6. So at least an idea for white, I think, would be bishop f1 with the intention of playing something like knight d2 or e5, saying no exchange for you, no exchange, and then aim for the e4 move. All right, here we go. Queen c2. Whoops. c5. Bummer. Okay, so huge accomplishment for Black to achieve this. Bishop e2. And let's call the bishop on b2 the mystical bishop. I'll call it the mystical bishop because you're dreaming of the bishop achieving play on the long diagonal. There are several famous games where the bishop achieves glory. I think my favorite just immediately comes to mind is Kasparov-Portish. I think it's 1983. But it's, not always the case. In any case, the thing I want to stress with that is Black by no means should take this pawn. Horrendous decision, because now the bishop, his scope has been dramatically increased. What would be better? I don't know. Queen c7 can't be that much better. Can't be a bad move. So here we go. Snip, snip. Goal achieved. We should also mention that this is what I would call a Grunfeld structure, and it happens in a lot of openings. We're going to get an a3 Queen's Indian defense that a lot of times back in the day with Kasparov, he got that structure. In any case, Black is going to have to say his play is going to come on the queen side, perhaps with a pass pawn. And White is going to push in the center. Okay, so to that end, some kind of move like aiming for b5 would be stronger, and lo and behold, I think you can get away with b5 in one move. Because if you take, there's rook b8. And if you didn't have b5 in one move, I would still say a6, because you need to create drama there and then on the c file. If you give White enough time, he will eventually do things to you over there on the king side. Okay, so here we go. Queen b7, king g1. f3, by all means, a move as well. Bishop e7, I don't get it. Good move. And here White lost his mind. And by playing h3. I'm a tempo fiend, understand. I'm not the only one, though, Scott. I'm really not. Um, Now I think very rich moment for you to be thinking about d5, right? I'd like to believe that that's the right move. Now, do I have all the tactics worked out? No, but it looks pretty good. It looks pretty good because you're opening up everything, and queen takes cannot be played. So there is, yeah, there's a wide, there's just a lot of problems here facing black if you take the pawn. And if you don't take the pawn and do something like that, well, I'm gonna do things like that. Do I totally know? No, I don't. But I definitely know that I want to free my hungry bishop. And in the game, Kasparov-Portish, amongst others, is just a very common theme. Also, actually, in the structure as well, for white to be sacrificing a pawn for play. And if you don't do it, if you don't do some kind of push, then you are just giving black, time to do stuff on the queen side. So h3. You know, I first saw the game, Scott, I do want to admit it felt like a very sophisticated maneuver to play h3 and king h2. It really did. Rook d7. I don't really understand a lot of these moves. I don't understand those moves. I don't really get it. Anyways, we're going to play this position a little bit. And you eventually do the right thing as you start playing over there on the king side. I like it. Black also finally starts doing stuff on the queen side. Alpha 0, h6, and d5. Okay. Now we have ourselves an interesting game. Knight e5. And I have a feeling you were writing here about not knowing exactly what's going on, but then we get the blunder that decides the game. So very nice finish. Very nice finish. Okay, I am going a little too slow. I've got so many games to cover. Let's move on to more strategic games with Wason here. Skok agrees with me that d5 was better. Well, I'm glad I got somebody on my side. Let me flip this. So this is actually, again, maybe I'll call it an opening that some experience is required. So here, white makes a mistake. I'm going to call it a subtle mistake by playing rook d1. And the reason this is a mistake is that after a6, bishop g5, knight bd7, black achieves the hedgehog of his dreams. And while I don't think black is better in this position is very tough to crack. Very tough to crack. Instead, just to show you, I played this a number of times as white, and it's an instructive position here. Now, if knight bd7, knight b5 will come. So the very common theory here is a6, and then we do this anti-intuitive move, takes, and either queen f4 or queen d3. And white actually has what we're going to call a small plus. Maybe just to show a standard line, queen f4, rook d1, bishop e7, knight e4, bishop takes, queen takes, rook a7. I digress a little bit, of course, but there are some famous games played by the great Ulf Andersson in this position by white, and maybe white has a small edge. Okay, so rook d1. And even though black is a much stronger player, he makes this mistake that is easy to make. And now, like I said, black's position is very rich. Queen d2, castles, bishop f4, and at this point, I would say you are doing great. And here you make a move that, let me just read your notes actually. you said, I knew basic ideas, but concrete moves I missed, and this is in regards to the move knight e8. Okay, so here I want you to appreciate that knight e8 is a chess crime, and it has everything to do with when someone makes the mistake of thinking that pawns are people. Pawns are not people. And what I mean by that is clearly, I think it's clear in any case, you were thinking that you did not want to play e5 because you would be giving white this square. But you have very nice control over that d5 square, and his bishop does not have great squares for moving itself. So yeah, I think you're doing great with e5, and I don't know where the bishop should go, but you have great center control. You can play rook c8 and yada yada, and it's not easy for white to do anything against that d5 square. So knight e8 is going to be a chess crime where you now are thrown into a passive position, and this decision is going to, white's going to make you suffer for that decision for a while. So b3 and h6, definitely an odd move, and I'm going to say that that is a move where, yeah, you clearly have some problems to solve now with the knight on e8, and it's like you're not addressing those problems, you're doing other things, and in fact, it's not just, I would say it's a problem because maybe he'll take someday on h6 or use the pawn on h6 as a lever to open you up. But more concretely, it's a loss of time. What do I want you to do? Something like the rook c8 or move the queen over to the queen side. At some point, knight df6, we've got to figure out a way to get our knight back to f6. Honestly, even e5. I would say e5 and move the knight back. e5 and move the knight back. Okay, so h6, rook c8, h4, bishop a8. Clearly, you know, you're at a loss. e4, maybe not necessary for him to play e4. In fact, I'm going to say I don't like it that much, but all right. g4, good move. Knight c5, queen e2, e5. Isn't it weird? Like, we do these moves when we are, you know, facing our own drama. Or rather, it's only in desperation that we play the necessary moves. Now, I want to say, white now looks fantastic, but I don't like his next move. He played bishop h2, and to me, it's incorrect because it feels to me like he's just hitting a rock on h2, whereas bishop d2 just seems correct, where g5 is going to come, and importantly, I want the bishop's influence on toward the king. And he is playing with the intention of opening you with g5, so it's weird to me that the bishop is hanging out on h2. Of course, white, I think, wanted to take with the pawn, but you had the counterplay on e4. Again, e4 is controversial, I feel. And here you get mad at a5, and you write that Stockfish liked knight e6. Right, you know, this position, suddenly with the weird bishop, it's like a Vishnu bishop. I didn't put those two and two together when I was preparing this, but it's truly a little bit of a Vishnu bishop there on h2. And right, knight e6 would help it out. And of course, a5 is weird because I don't think white wants to play b4 anyway. Okay, good move. Mostly a good move because he's trying to fix the bishop on h2. Okay, was that necessary? I don't know. I don't know. f5 is very thematic, but again, I'm upset that the bishop is stuck over there. He fixes it. And he's just going to calmly play this position. I'm sure there were other things you could have done here, but it is a hard road. Okay, now he's going to display his chess skills. Looks very strong to me. And I have to admit, this next shot here, boom, I was like, what? I was like, what? Double exclam. I've been doing the Agard calculation book, and I couldn't get it, man. I'm going to cheat. I'm just going to turn it on. Yeah. So it's kind of a Vishnu thing, actually, because there's so many moves that white could do. The computer, oh my god, knight h7 is actually now suddenly the computer's top move. But everything wins. Everything wins. And I'm going to get into it. I'm not sure at least immediately did I get it. I don't think I got it. So the point is king here, smack, smack, oh, and then the old school queen g2. Right. So you can't move the bishop because of this. So, right. I had to turn on, let me just say, I don't know, so, right, it's a double exclam in the sense that the computer nails it, but it's so weird because black can barely move anyway. Any case, knight h7, very good move, and we'll finish it off here. And it's all over, baby blue. All right, let's move on to Simon's game. And here we go. Right, with e6, you can play my system against the French. I did a video, I think it was last week, about how Magnus played my system against the French. Very simple thing to learn, and it was just remarkable that an idea, I'll tell you exactly how it happened. And thank you so much for a guy named Keat on YouTube for turning me on to this. I did the video in like April. Then Anish, who talks to Magnus all the time, is doing like a streaming lab about the French. My thing gets mentioned by somebody in the chat. Anish looks into it, says, oh yeah, this is dangerous. And then a couple days later, Magnus plays it against Hare Krishna and wins a very nice game. So, it's rare that something out of my mind gets imparted to the man at the top. All right, here we go. So, we could say various things about this, like a Cambridge Springs, but so far a good version of a Cambridge Springs for white. A6, I don't get it. And now C5. All right. Very committal move. I think it's correct, or it's at the very least interesting. And the game now becomes a question of, can black achieve some kind of e5 break? And the following, I would say, next 5 to 10 moves are very interesting to me. There was several questions I had about it. Black plays knight h5, and white has a fantastic trick coming up. Doesn't decide the game or anything, it's just a nice move. What should he do, though? That's kind of an interesting question. Probably just bring the queen home as a start, and then go from there. But the queen's going to go home anyway. We're going to see. So knight h5. I'll be agnostic about what black should do. b4. With a very nice trick that if queen b4, bishop c7, and the queen is going to get smoked out of the house by one of those moves. So queen d8. And one interesting thing about the London players is they will often get what I'm going to call a traditional position like this, because this stonewall position. But the bishop will be incredibly well placed. Obviously, it's doing a lot of duty touching these squares, but also it is going to be very helpful on the defense if black starts throwing himself at white, which he is now doing. So I think, yeah, with the London, the placement of the bishop, is interesting in that it shows that the valuation of a pawn structure really depends, of course, on where the pieces are. And the bishop on h2 can often in the London be just an amazing asset, like it is here. So I like the way the trend is going for white. And black comes around with a knight, Stonewall style. a4, okay. Bishop f6. I had some ideas for black actually here. Maybe, I don't know if it's so great. I was thinking of weird moves like bishop h4. It's probably no good, but that's where my dreams were. Probably terrible move. So, knight e4. Now here's the good thing about the Stonewall. Even when things go mostly bad, as they have gone here for black, the game's not actually over. So he's intending e5, and white plays another great move. Okay, so let's say this. White has completely outplayed black up to this point of the game. The bishop on c8 is abysmal. e5 is not going to happen. The rook on a8 is toast. Okay, so black makes a committal move. And should he play it, maybe on an objective level, maybe it's no good. But it is certainly true that he can't just sit around. He has to try to change the trend, right? Now, should white take? I was uncertain. My gut is no, that he shouldn't take. And that black cannot win the battle of the b file if he opens the b file. So in a way, I think it's a little bit of a bluff that black's got going on. Will white still be better after c takes? Absolutely. My sense here is that white should be aiming for g4, just to put more pressure on the black position. But okay, this wasn't terrible. And the weird thing now is that by not committing with the g4 plan, we're not killing black, and he is threatening to get out. In particular, the knight on b6 wants to do something. He really needs to do something. And that's why I'm critical of the next move, a5, because it's encouraging black to go on some kind of journey to fix the knight. And I think that white, in looking at a position like this in his mind, said something like pawns are people, because it looks like the knight on c5 is amazing. It looks like we're crushing black. But I don't know. I don't know. The bishop will eventually go to c8, and unclear that the knight is going to be so spectacular. Meanwhile, black does have a prized possession in the dark square bishop. So, all right, g5. And here I felt white needed to play g3. That we don't want to allow gf, ef, or anything like that. And the reason is we don't want to give the bishop on f6 a pawn to scratch at, right? Our pawns on dark squares should be providing a wall against that strong dark square bishop. And one of the reasons actually to have played g4 earlier would be to proactively stop things like g5. So I thought he should have definitely considered soon taking. You take the thing. Take the thing. And now g3. Okay. So now I think white is a little bit better, but black's position very tough to crack. Now all kinds of weird things happen. And you ask yourself, yeah, from a pawn structure perspective, is white better? Yeah, but the black pieces aren't worse, and that bishop on f6 is a monster. His rooks are fine. And now we do a misguided thing. We start running with the king, and all of a sudden things go wrong. Queen h4 is coming, and it's a little bit unpleasant. And now weird things happen. Okay, so f takes, h takes, and right. Now white does this move, which makes no sense to me, bishop d2. Well, it does make some sense. In this position, black should be thinking of murdering white, and Simon correctly says a move like e5. And, you know, floodgates are going to open onto the white king. Instead, he tries to save his piece, and g5, nice move. Now, you know, he needs to find a way to deal with the bishop, but he doesn't. It's still under lockdown over there. Do I understand this position? Not really. I mean, there's a lot going on. This, though, isn't correct. And boom. Sometimes, you know, we do all these deep thoughts. And we then blundered away with a move like rook h3. Simon correctly says that rook h6 is winning, and the reason is that bishop is under lockdown on g3. It's going to get trapped. It's come too far into the lair. One of my favorite comments, Jesse says, murdering so nicely. That's right. Okay, Say Chess, you did not miss your game. We're coming up later. All right, let's just look back at where we are on the table of contents so Say Chess can see where he is going to be. We just did Simon. We're going to do Raven's Beautiful Exchange Slav now. We'll go back to the game analysis. Okay, yeah, this game I'm going to go through kind of quickly, and I want to make a remark about game submissions and stuff. The show is set up so to encourage people to get in the habit of annotating their games. So I usually cover roughly the 16 best annotated games. I am prejudiced against games that are quick games. There are people submitting games of like 5 minutes plus 3 seconds. And if they're just cursory notes, I also won't do it. So yeah, just that pointed out there. I want to also say we have several games submitted from around the world. This show has an amazing array of time zones in it where chess is being played for real. So kind of interesting. And also, as I mentioned before, we have the ChessDojo ladder and round robin system. And of course, me and Kostya cover a lot of these games on the Sunday Night Fights show, which is generally around 6 o'clock and Eastern time. Stefan Traunisch is here. We're going to cover his game in a little bit. Okay, here we go. I'm going to go through this one quickly. I felt it was a great exposition of the Exchange Slav. I played the Exchange Slav a lot. It's like I'm going to call it a cousin of the London. Often very, very tactical. And of course, in this position, black has one problem, and that's his bishop on c8. However, it's not that big of a deal. And here, black shouldn't be messing with moves like h6, but should either play bishop d7 or a6 intending b5. And what are we going to say? Small advantage for white. And h6 is a crime that Raven correctly notes should be met with g4. And we've got the lever. Absolutely, go after him. That's what he gets for playing h6. Okay, we missed our chance. b6. I don't like b6. Too many light squares are given up over there. So a6, b5 would be, let's call it the more traditional way of doing things. You know that I don't like it. But okay. Now, interestingly, this knight a5 does prove to be a mistake. And if you just imagine, if you're a black player in this kind of structure, what you should see is that if you had your pawns on a6 and b5, then this move knight a5 would be amazing. But right now, White has a nice shot that Raven plays with knight b5. Very nice. And all of a sudden there's grief on the c-file. And this is how Old Man Cry has won many games in the Exchange Slav. C-file goal accomplished. Knight e5, get the knight out of the way, and now we're murdering him on the c7 square. Very nice. Very nice. Very simple and strong. Checked the miserable king. Beautiful chess. Beautiful, simple chess, and this is a lost position. I actually can recall when I was a kid, there was a Botvinnik game, and White had, in a slightly similar way, achieved domination of the c-file, and the note was given that White was winning. And that was confusing for me as a kid. I was like, okay, it's cool that he got the c-file, but is it really winning? And the answer is yes. The game is over, and Raven puts it away nicely here. Pretty simple stuff. And Black struggles a little bit. Very nice put away. Chess is sometimes an easy game. Okay, so then he resigns. Very nice exposition on the dreams and goals of the Exchange Slav. All right, let's do Nicholas's game. Nicholas has been on the show many times, and this is a ChessDojo ladder game. And you know, Vishnu makes so much fun of London players, and this Tory attack has a lot of similarities to the London, and the danger of this kind of opening, right, is you end up doing the same mistakes over and over. And this game, I think, you know, that criticism should be maybe borne in mind. We'll talk about a specific instance. So c3, d6, e4. Now, I do want to say Nicholas has a lot of experience in these structures and has managed to outplay several people. We've seen it already on the show many times. And so, like with Vishnu's game, the understanding of the basic dynamics will really help. And I don't like Black's next move. He plays c5. And if he could recapture that pawn with a piece, I would be much more happy with him. But as it is, I don't like it, and I like that move a lot. The bishop parks itself, and to me, even though Nicholas later calls this a tabia position of the Tory, I already feel like White is doing great. So, knight c6, queen e2. We could argue about queen e2, but okay. Queen c7, and now castles. I was thinking, for example, that e5 had to be a strong move for White here. Now, maybe Nicholas doesn't like it because of knight h5, and, you know, but to me, I don't know. This looks pretty good. Let's just mention some basics. There's these weaknesses around the c5 pawn. This guy's getting dominated by the bishop. To me, it looks very pleasant. Instead, we get castles, and maybe Black kind of sort of manages to survive here. So, knight a5, bishop h4, knight h5. Mild similarities, of course, to our first game between Say Chess and Eyelash. I'm not a friend of rook d8. Didn't make sense to me. I thought g5 should be played. Didn't make sense because you're not really threatening anything massive. By you, I mean Black. And that the other rook might want to go there. And g5 is simply, I think, on Black's agenda. Similarly, I'm not a fan of rook fd1, Nicholas, because the rook, not clear it wants to be there. And if you imagine, like later, this knight g3 stuff is going to happen, well, our rook, at the bare minimum, might want to be on e1. It might also want to be on f1. So let's just say I'm not sure the rook wants to move. And a default move, I think, could be something like bishop c2. Just to get out of dodge and see what black does, you know. Is he going to play knight f4? Is he going to play g5, queen f4? I have no idea. But the bishop does want to get out of the way. Okay, so rook fd1, g5. And these are fascinating positions where I'm going to say, in general, unless white has something special, they are going to be good for black, because the unopposed bishop makes it so that it's very difficult to execute an attack over there. Okay, but let's look at what happens. Bishop e6, bishop e2, and I have a feeling that, Nicholas, that you didn't see why bishop e2 was a cool move. Namely, after rook a b8, you should be thinking about knight h2. And you wrote that, in fact, in your notes, where you need to, you know, start doing a little dance on the light squares. And one of the dreams for white is to not only trade off this guy, but maybe dance around the light squares and see if you can create some drama. Now, this move, I didn't plan it this way. How could I plan it? These are just the games submitted, but of course, it's a similar mistake to what Vishnu did earlier. And the c3 pawn is now tender. And actually, Nicholas, of all the moves you did in this game, b3 is the one to really think about as a terrible move. And one thing I really want to stress is, later I'm going to talk about opposite color bishops. And usually the whole thing of opposite color bishops is you have an unopposed bishop. So at this point, the bishop on g7, it's a cool piece, but it's not that amazing. The second you play b3, though, that bishop's value has skyrocketed, right? Because now, what are you going to do? Even if you end up moving somehow the pawn on c3, the bishop's scope has just been dramatically increased. So, right, chess crime with b3. And now it's a hard road. b5, very natural move. Knight c6. And that is clearly the move of a man who is rallying the wagons. Okay, c4, good move. a5, good move. You wrote b4 was something you should think about. I totally agree. And here I assume that you are lost. And my basis for that would be to say two advantages. The beautiful passed pawn on c3, plus the fact that in a position like this, the two bishops really are massive. So here's how it goes. a4, it's a hard life. It's a hard life, and a4, both players are missing the bishop takes b3 as possible. But honestly, I think it's a hard road. I think this is a very hard road for white, even if we don't blow it like this. And this position, too, I assume is winning. Let's just read what you wrote here for a second. With opposite color bishops, white's chances of drawing the game are high. Yeah, I really disagree on this one. Eventually, black is going to get in h5, h4, and the attack on the light squares, the dark squares, will mean that your king will come under fire. So either clear advantage or winning for black, I would say, in this position. And also in the game, got to be winning. This one I actually like a little bit more from a practical perspective, because the knight can be a tricky piece in an endgame like this. Okay, I wanted at some point black to play h5, and there he finally does it. And all kinds of dancings happen. Should he have traded queens? No, I wanted him, like with the other position, I wanted him to keep them on. a lot here I didn't understand. Okay, and I think we're heading into a draw here. Lucky escape. Very nice. Yep, that's an old school one. So very nice defense at the end, Nicholas. All right, let's head to Marty. Now, I need to make an announcement. This is September. This is the last day. This is the last day you get a discount on giving us a sub at ChessDojo. We need it. I usually don't plead, but my boss, Kostya Kavutsky, he's not really my boss, but you know, I was supposed to put in a widget, guys, and I didn't know how to do it. I don't have the technical skills. It was going to say so-and-so subscribe to us, and he's a really cool person, and I don't have the technical know-how. So if you give me a sub, us a sub, it'll get Kostya off me, because I failed him today. I spent all this time preparing this thing, and I didn't get the widget, and I don't understand widgets anyway. So it helped me out. Here we go. This is Marty. Marty's been on the show a bunch, and we get a very interesting position that I've seen with reversed colors, and it's this really interesting thing actually. I just want to point it out with reversed colors. So how does this thing go? It goes like d4, d5, c4, knight f6. Now, back in the day, I read some opening book, and it said knight f6 bad. And maybe it is bad, but the weird thing is that as long as you don't take on d5, it's kind of hard to prove anything for white, anything special, that is. So if you imagine knight f3, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, black can kind of wait. He can wait until you play knight c3. And we're going to get a similar dynamic in this game here. Castles, good move. And now black loses his mind with h6. This is not a helpful thing. One thing that happened to me, very embarrassed, I had a senior moment, and I was talking to Vishnu about actually it was about Vishnu's game. Vishnu also, we're going to talk a little bit about the Tarash a little later. And Vishnu is a victim of having studied the Dubov Tarash. And I got busted, actually. A guy from Germany says, why are you pronouncing it like a French dude? Tarash. You lived in Germany, you should know better. And it's because when I pronounce things in a German accent, a lot of times, people give me the funny look, So that's why I'm sorry about it. Okay, let me just show briefly, how does this go? So now I'm probably going to forget it. So anyways, here we go. c4, c5. d4, c takes, knight takes, d5. Actually, I blew it already. Hold on. So, g3, sorry about this, e6, d4, takes, d5, bishop g2, e5, knight f3, d4. This was the position I was trying to remember in my senior moment. I couldn't. And what we have here is something similar to a dynamic that we're going to get with h6. Only notice that in this game, black can achieve e5 in one go instead of sidestepping it, but it's unclear if the h6 is that big of a thing, though in this game it turns out to be kind of useful. Okay, so b3, interesting, probably a good move. But now, here's the thing. I agree with you that bishop b2 was better. Fundamentally, though, this position should be nice for you, Marty. One thing I want you to see, okay, is for the next 5 to 10 moves, even beginning now, you weren't sufficiently wary of your bishop on b2 becoming bad. So let's say a couple obvious things. Black has a symbolic, it might be more than symbolic, he has an advantage in the center. But in compensation for that, you are up to tempi, because you're castled and because it's your move. And that center is looking pretty fragile. So there should be a variety of ways for you to attack that center using the extra time that you have. So you write about knight c3, I like it, and knight d2. And now you liked e3, which is an interesting move. A little bit, it would be hard to play because you're losing. It's not really necessarily tempo, but it is true, and this is the point I want to make, that in this position, your bishop on b2 is very problematic. Very problematic. And it's not that easy to figure out what you're supposed to do. I do think that you should be playing queen c2 as you have in the notes, and that rook c1 doesn't really go to solving any of your problems. Let's say this. The reason you're not playing queen c2 is because you're terrified of knight b4. Knight b4, though, not clear to me that's something that he or she wants. Rook c1, though, like, what are we doing? I don't know. So even if you were afraid and didn't want to play queen c2 right away, you could start with a3, and I think the guy should probably play a5. So rook c1 is one of those moves where I'm like, Marty, check out your bishop on b2. You need to feel some serious urgency about fixing that guy. Okay, and like you said, I think bishop f5 would have been better in general. Black wants to control the squares in front of the pawns. Okay, good. Now, I'm not thrilled with knight b4, and now knight h4. Now, what you're about to do, I like a lot in spirit, which is you're trying to gain control of the light squares and maybe be trained off some pieces. But I really want to stress that it's the bishop on b2 that's the main culprit of your problems here. So, you know, I don't know how to, I don't even know how to exactly do it, but I need you to open the thing up, whether it's in some way with e3 or f4, some way to open that thing up. Okay, and here I think he should be thinking about a g6 to prevent knight f5. Knight f5 I like better, but okay. I don't understand. And I don't now one of the interesting things about this is a very complicated position, of course. But what he's doing is he's giving you a chance to shake up the dynamic of the position, right? Before I just wasn't too thrilled about it. And now he's giving you the chance to shake everything up with snip, snop, and slap. And I don't know what's happening, but you are going to be thinking about it. All of a sudden, the rook that I didn't know what it was doing is doing things. This pawn is tender. You're going to be thinking about f4 and e3 and knight f3. And if you break the pawn chain, your bishop is free. So just on that very principled level of being sensitive to the bishop, I think that's why you wanted to go for this decision. A key thing we go again and again on the show is sensitivity to the bad piece is something that is important for everybody's chess development. And I think actually soon I want to do my own little video on the story that I have of my own chess. So hopefully I'll get that out soon, of the story of the bad piece. Okay, so we get some madness. Again, I don't feel like you're addressing the main problem. And that was a bold move, bishop c4. Because you your force count on the king side is pretty ugly now. f4, maybe he has something better. Bishop d7, for example. Queen e4, all right. It's frightening. And now king h2, the guy plays a really terrible positional move here in queen g4. Yeah, an absolute terrible move. It's a tactical problem as well. But right, as you note, he needs to play bishop g4. And just in general, he needs to do everything he can to keep the queens on the board and tell you that your bishop on b2 is not participating in the attack, and that therefore, in the long term, he should be able to start some drama against your king. And instead it ended. Boom. And I guess we're going to call that done here. He frees your bishop too, which was nice. Okay. Let's go to the famous Paul in New Jersey. We are now going to switch to initiative won and lost. And Paul in New Jersey is our first up in this business, in this segment. And a thing I've done in the past shows is I've forgotten to switch scenes, and then people start yelling at me. So here we go. Paul in New Jersey. Someone needs to do a video on Paul in New Jersey, because every month it's the same story, and it fascinates me every time. To put it into a nutshell, Paul in New Jersey is an exemplar of a player who is incredibly pessimistic about his own games and his own abilities. And it's just fascinating because there's a whole spectrum. Obviously, some people are overly optimistic. Famous examples are Kramnik at the end of his career, thinking that every position is won for him. There are less examples, especially among the top players, of people who are incredibly pessimistic about their positions. But there's definitely, a spectrum. And Paul's interesting because he's just this example of somebody at the totally pessimistic side of the spectrum. And sometimes Paul, it hurts to go over these games because you beat yourself up about your own chess, and it doesn't feel joyful. But I appreciate it. It's you're on this very heavy side of the pessimistic side of the spectrum. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to flip it so we can see it from Paul's point of view. We get a beautiful King's Indian. And Vishnu and others at the dojo have been experimenting with this fashionable H3 system. And I'm going to go ahead and say that White didn't, even though he's playing this system, didn't understand what the idea was. So let's get into it. There's a variety of ways that Black can play. And my sense of how to play this thing is that White wants, excuse me, in this position to really, he's playing for space, and the first idea is to prophylactically stop the F5, the traditional King's Indian defense F5 break. So, to my mind, G4 would be the move to play here, maybe even before Bishop D3. Okay, and sometimes Black can still play F5, but the point is to try to make life miserable for Black to play F5. And like Nimzovich said, prevention of an opponent's plan often magically develops into an attack. And I think sometimes it's confusing for White players because they see top GMs play the move G4 and win in some later stunning attack. But the first point is prevention, to stop F5 from happening for Black. Instead, White here now starts playing on the queen side. And if you're going to play this way with H3, the intention is to stop him first, prevention on the king side, and then maybe we'll talk to our side of the board, which is the queen side. Okay, bishop d7. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about here. Bishop e3, knight h5. Let's say, Paul, that the opening has gone fantastically for you. It looks great. You said you should have played a4. Okay, but you know what? This position's great for you. Totally great. Yeah. Queen c2. What is white doing? He doesn't know. Okay, so I'm going to say, just on my naive first look, is that black is much better in this position. And that your next move, h6, has good intentions, and that is to play f5 but not have to deal with f5. So the first thing as a tempo fiend that I would like to look at is just the question of, is that true? And so if we imagine f5, knight g5, f4, well, I don't know. That looks pretty good for you, Paul. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and say that looks great. If bishop c5, yeah, no, that's the end of the ball game. That's game. We're winning this one. So, right, I'm going to go ahead and say that looks like a loss, an unnecessary loss of tempo to me. You are still doing great, though, after h6. Snip, snip, and now queen f6. Now, I do want to be critical about queen f6, but let's pause for a moment and say that the King's Indian is a beautiful opening. And when they play d5, it should be said that they are playing against your queen's knight, i.e. the knight on c5. The guy let you exchange it. And it's true that the bishop, the light square bishop on d3 is generally not white's best piece, but your unopposed bishop here, oh, that's a real beauty. That's a real beauty. Now, long speech. When you're a King's Indian player, you are aiming for aggression against the black king. There's more than one, or the white king. There's more than one way to do it. And this position features really an array of possibilities for you. The most natural to me is f5. Also, I want to mention that any movement by white on his weak side of the board is generally a disaster. And you say to me, well, what about that whole h3, g4 thing you were talking about earlier, Cry? Well, that's kind of an interesting exception to the rule. That's why the system is interesting for white. It's breaking a rule. But the point is here, you're not stopping f5. White isn't. And h3 is a fantastic lever opportunity for black. So in this position, I think f5 is amazing. And I don't believe that white's going to survive the traditional roll-up of f4, g5, f4. At his disposal is also knight f4. Looks good to me. Barbaric, but probably also effective, is g5, g4. All of these moves seem very promising to me for black. Now, this is the first move, even though it works out, Paul, that I want to be a little critical of with queen f6. Because you're threatening a cheapo with bishop h3. The guy falls for it. And it's the problem with queen f6 is maybe the guy could organize a defense. And the traditional attempt here for white would be king h2, knight g1, and then g3. Right? Because when you play queen f6, you're blocking the f-pawn. And it's not just the f-pawn, of course, but this rook. So it's really like you've taken away a lot of your firepower by playing queen f6. All right, let's look what happened. c5, the guy doesn't see it, bishop h3. Are you winning? Yes. Now, Paul, we've seen a lot of these games where you've lost the initiative, and this is one of them. And so we got 2 games on the initiative today. This one I felt was a pretty instructive slide. And one thing, let's just say right out, even though you've won a pawn on the king's side, the important feature of that pawn is that it's a defender of the white king. White, however, like in every king's Indian, is going to come at you on the queen side, and if he achieves an initiative over there, it doesn't matter about the pawn. The pawns aren't people, especially when it comes to the initiative. So that's the danger, and well, let's see how it goes. Of course, you're winning this position. Knight h2, maybe he's got better move than that. All right, you could have played bishop c8 too. There's some sense in that you don't want to get hit with c6, but bishop d7 is fine. Okay, now let's just presume that that was okay, and that was okay. I like knight f4 better, but let's just look here for a second. All right, here you say I should have considered queen g5. Okay, queen g5 would have been fine, but I really want to stress here that the basic King's Indian thing to do in this position would be to play bishop f8, either now or after throwing in the b6 move. I guess I like throwing in the b6 move. Why? Because that is very much a bad bishop still. Is it the only way for you to play? No, but the bishop on c5 is his best piece. So get rid of the thing. Also, this move, if you're going to move up one of those pawns over there, to me it would be h5. You know, throw h5, h4 in. But I didn't understand that move. And like you said, it's really taking away a square from the queen. Okay. And here we go. I don't like this move, Paul. Why? Because your knight might not have any future over there. By the way, did I understand a lot of White's moves? I really didn't. Knight e2, g3. I don't claim to understand. White should be creating drama of his own with b6 and such. And he's playing on the wrong side of the board. Okay, so now the crime happens, and the thing that I really want to mention here is initiative in these positions. Because even though, and when I say these positions, I really mean positions with opposite sides attack. And, you know, usually when we talk about opposite sides attack, the paradigmatic example is opposite sides castling, right? But in the King's Indian, it really is as if it was opposite sides castling, because White has to give you a bloody nose on the queen side before you mate him. And so this next move is criminal, because you're thinking about the pawn that you've won as like a pawn that you're going to covet and then carry into the end game and then win some long end game position. But the thing about a King's Indian is it is about murder. You need to murder the guy, and now after h3, the pawn might as well be, it's just a chump sitting there on h3. It's not doing anything at all. And especially now that you trade queens, I don't know anymore. I don't know. Yeah. So, okay. You right here, bishop g4. Yeah, that's a good move. Is it, in any case, right, g4. The thing about bishop g4 is you were playing with this intention, so you wouldn't have done all those other moves anyway. So, yeah, it's a tricky thing, because then the computer says, oh, you had bishop g4, and that tells you in hindsight, like, oh, I was, h3 wasn't so bad, and it was the intention of h3, which was this, that led you to this position. Now, are you in trouble here? No, you're not in trouble. But the fact is you now got to be worried about losing the initiative. Okay, and here we go. f5. I don't know. Yeah, it's a cool King's Indian move, but he owns the e4 square. A lot of white's moves I don't understand. You gave him the knight. That's what the white players dream about in these positions. Now he's starting to do stuff. And oh no, disaster has struck. So right, this often happens. Well, I don't often. This is the horror of the King's Indian. And one of the interesting things about Paul's games through the years, right, is he has played especially as a white piece. We've seen a lot of games with white pieces against things like the French. He's played these traditional, let's call them Fisher openings. King's Indian, also a Fisher opening, right, where one side is where you are trying to wrest the initiative from your opponent in a kind of merciless and brutal way. And to play with the initiative, generally, my experience usually means you got to play with confidence, right? Like there's going to be some very murky positions where you're not sure what's going on, and you have to trust in the principles of what you've got going, right? Yeah. I like this comment. Pawns are definitely not people to us King's Indian players. That's right. Okay. Let's move on to Luke's game. And one thing we should say, this is also about the initiative, is that with opposite sides castling and games with initiative, it's a merciless affair, because in general, one mistake will have just enormous consequences. There's obviously other kinds of positions where both sides can make numerous inaccuracies and the game goes on. For example, those Ruy Lopez maneuvering games. Black can make loads of mistakes and still not be lost. But in a position like what we're about to see, one mistake can really be grave. We talked about this earlier, and I mentioned it anyways earlier, because here, this famous A3 system, which Kasparov made popular, sometimes called the Petrosian system, you could call it the Kasparov system. Anyways, I went off on a long tangent in, I believe it was Scott's game, about the Grunfeld structures that can arise with knight c3, bc, and then c5, cd, cd, and then we have the whole thing with the central pawns versus an attempt by black to play actively on the queen side. Okay, so here we go. Black plays d5, good move. Bishop g5, probably okay. The issue is going to be that if you're going to play with g3, which is, I think, the more common move, then you can't play h6. Or rather, if they do play h6, then your bluff is called. White plays with e3. All right, now things are going to get exciting. Black plays immediately knight e4. And this is very typical. Very typical play. Very tense moment in the game. Black could, of course, considered h6 first before knight e4. I haven't gone too deep into this, but this move h4, it ends up working out great for Luke, but I don't like it that much. And my main reason for not liking it is that now I don't really know where White's king wants to go long term. And we're going to talk about some Tarash positions later. In the Tarash, as with the isolated queen pawn, and the hanging pawns, which black can get by playing c5 at any moment. that person with the isolated queen pawn or the hanging pawns is going to have what we call a dynamic weakness. So the pawns will be a little loose, but they're going to be controlling the center. In general, when they control the center like that, it will be difficult for us to create big drama, to create big drama against the black king. Now, I do not like black's next move is just heretical and should lose. I think should lose quickly. I haven't looked at it too deeply, but just now I'm fascinated by all kinds of weird thoughts coming into my mind. For example, is this thing I'm about to do might just be the most ridiculous thing you're going to see today, but let me just look at it for a second. Knight e4, snip, queen c7. How dumb is that? Maybe playable. If you protect the bishop or move it or something, this is probably, I don't know. You play bishop b5. If bishop c8, then maybe this one, you know. Anyways, I'm not sure. I just felt like this whole thing with knight e4 was maybe a little suspicious. I wanted him to, like I said, I wanted him to play h6 first. All right, h4. It's a curious position. My sense is that black should be okay and should play probably something like rook e8, so that it's very difficult. I think it's impossible for white to take, 1,000 times on e4 because of the discovery. In any case, let's focus on the move that black did, which I think is just terrible. Okay, black does this, and this is truly a man who's saying that pawns are people. He is going to he's going to completely discoordinate his business to win this pawn. Okay, so this to me is a really bad example of a pawn grubber. And one thing I want to stress is that what black has done here is not simply liberate the rook on h1. And I know a lot of people are salivating when they see the rook on h1. And it's true, rook on h1 is cool. But the main feature of this position that I really despise for black is that his three minors, I don't know what they're doing anymore. Like, for example, earlier you had the knight on e4. This bishop was like a helicopter parent living through the dreams and aspirations of that knight, right? This bishop is going to, at the very least, owe white a tempo, and no one knows what this knight's doing. And in the meantime, we're going to talk about initiative because, of course, if we gave black enough time, he would create an initiative against our king. But the story of this position right now is quite simple. Both sides are going to attack, and the value of the initiative is gone skyrocketed now that black has created this offensive bishop takes g5, and it was already a big deal anytime we're going to have opposite sides castling. And the simple reason is once one side starts punching another guy in the face, then it's not going to be possible for black to keep his initiative on the queen side because he's got to shift everything over to the king side. Okay, so speech over. The thing that happens now, the crime that Luke commits, is taking g5. And what's so terrible to me about that is that that bishop owes us time. It owes us a move, right? And yeah, monster deal. He writes about rook h3. I'm sure rook h2 is similar. And boom. And here, he really wants to take the bishop and play f4. And now the e-pawn's defended. I'm sure this is great. But, honestly, the bishop, once you get the rook to go terrible too, all of the pieces are terrible now, right? All the pieces are terrible. And we just really need a way to find a way to get the lady into the game, and this black's position is going to collapse. So here we go. Knight g5, queen g5, f4. Yeah, it's weird to me. And now queen e2. I don't get it. Even now, like, why not rook h3? So, right, a number of moves are now going to happen where white is the one losing time, and black is going to start doing his own drama. Now, I don't know exactly what's going on in this position, but c5 is definitely a move that black can consider, and f5 is a move that black can consider. f5 is a little rich, maybe because of g4, but I'm just saying at some point the queen can get lateral action onto the pawn on h7, and c5 should really be considered. In any case, here we go. Rook a e8, king g7. I don't like that move. No, I don't know. I don't like that move at all. I don't like that one either. Okay, there we go. He's given us the initiative back. All right, f5 should mostly be okay, but only because we're snipping this thing on c7. Right. Let's mention that our knight on c3 wants to do cool things in life. All right, in any case, g5, no, don't, because it's a valuable pawn, and you're like you're messing with him over there. Okay, here you say that queen g3 is a blunder, and that you should have traded queens. Let's see what we do right. Not a blunder per se, but there's no good reason not to trade. I misevaluated the position and thought I had the advantage. Well, if you try... Okay, I'm going to say if you trade, you have at least some kind of small advantage. But it's hard for me to imagine that you're not better here. Very hard to imagine. Okay, rook c8. And now I assume it's rook c3 that you're afraid of, and you boldly play king d2. Rook c3. On a practical level, that's a good move. But I'm going to go ahead and say I don't really believe in it. Now I have to say, that's pretty clever. And then you go here. 3 to your right. Moving away from any threats, I thought that was a perfectly fine move in the game, but the engine thinks it's terrible, and king c1 should have been played instead. I assume you mean king c2, but right, that seems natural. And what's odd about it, of course, is that you're allowing the knight to come with a check. He could, of course, have... Yeah, okay. Trouble. Dang. And I guess you're toast here. What's great about Instructive, Luke, is that the guy, he got the initiative, right? And a simple thing, I wish someone had told me this when I was a kid, that when you have opposite sides castling, and we're going to talk a little bit about opposite color bishops, is a similar thing. The value of the initiative skyrockets. And that's certainly what we're seeing in these positions here. Queen goes away, and at the very least, a very unpleasant position. I don't know if it's resignable, but there it is. Whew! Tough game. Okay, We're going to move on to Stefan's game. Let's look at the table of contents. And we're going to now start talking about opposite bishops. I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean by that. And let's introduce Stefan's game and say this, I think, is the second time on the show. And Stefan is playing in real over-the-board tournaments. Holy moly. It's kind of cool. It's kind of cool, actually. This show is the games submitted from all over the world, and several of them, even in this show, are being played over the board. So it's a cool barometer for me to just see how many games are being played over the board out there. Yeah. We had to play with masks. It is very exhausting. I can imagine that. I really can. I find the mask exhausting. Honestly, I don't think even as much as I want to do it, I wouldn't want to play with a mask. Yeah, I've seen the Bundesliga, they got fancy like glass stuff, and I don't know. It's a whole new world out there. All right, here we go. Here's Stefan's game. The beginning very much goes his way, and I know that this bishop b4 move is like theory or whatever you want to call it, but I don't like it, and precisely for the reasons that eventually happen in this game, which is that black really never wants to lose that bishop. So let's look at what happens. d5. One thing that's, I think, hard for Sicilian players to understand is the basic dynamic of the game is that they give up an immense amount of time in terms of their development to do these fancy pawn moves. And these fancy pawn moves are mostly aimed at controlling the white pieces. So, for example, in this position, the e6 pawn is taking away these squares, this guy's taking away this square, and those light squares want to be used by these pieces, right? So that's why, in general, black never really wants to open the position with a move like d5. I didn't understand that when I was a Sicilian player as a kid. Maybe I would have kept playing the Sicilian, the terrible opening that it is, if I had understood that. I'm not an expert here, but I think moves like knight e5 and that kind of move are what black is going to be looking for. Okay, d5, and now a3. Very nice move. Snip, snop, and I love white's position. de, fe, knight e4. And here, Stefan plays the very natural queen e1. I haven't looked in the database, but I have a feeling that this is not something to feel bad about. This is like what most GMs would play, queen e1. It keeps the queen out of the way, but still influential, also on the dark squares. And Stefan writes, queen d3 was better. Let's take a look. It's anti-intuitive because the knight on e4 wants to move anyway, right? And you've got to see that in this position that knight e5 is not that great. But it's not immediately obvious to this hombre why it isn't that great. And, especially you would have to see it in advance. And I assume there's some kind of trick that these players are seeing when they do this. But that's the kind of knowledge where, opening prep, you would have to kind of like know it. Whereas your move, beautiful. I love it. Okay, let's look. Now, right, the guy's position is difficult. And I talked about this as a way of talking about opposite color bishops. And some people would say, cry what he's saying. This is really a two-bishop situation. And the thing I wanted to really stress by calling it an opposite bishop situation is that white's dark square bishop here is an absolute beast. And what happens with opposite color bishops, and this is why I put it right next to the section about about the initiative is the value of initiative goes up when you have a bishop that's potentially on the rampage on its color. And the simple point to make is that if white gets an initiative on the dark squares, he is going to be up a piece in that universe, in the universe of the dark squares. So that's the theme going forward, and for the most part, Stefan makes use of that very fact here. So, thank you very much, guys. I caught it. I caught it. I've done this mistake so many times, but I've caught it now. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys, for fixing it. Whisper him. Tell him to do something. Absolutely. I'm sorry about that, my friends. I've done it. I've done it before. It feels like a mistake I just do over and over. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, that was terrible. What I'll do, at least I'm going to try to do, is I'll post this thing on YouTube and somehow find a way. Oh, it would be very difficult. It'd be very difficult. Somehow maybe find a way to superimpose the board or something. I don't know. We'll see if I can figure out something. So here we go. Knight c5 and knight f6 probably should have been played. And check out what happens now. Boom. Very nice move. And the point really is to say that, right, we want the initiative on the dark squares. And what's going to happen is Stefan makes the mistake, human mistake, of overlooking several of Black's moves. And there's one in particular that I think will be instructive that he overlooks. But even though he overlooks it, his initiative is so powerful that it doesn't really matter. So let's look at what happens. Queen e5, knight g7, very nice move. And one thing I'll stress here is that taking on g7 took away a lot of Black's ability to fight for the dark squares, because that was a pawn on the dark squares. That's two more dark squares that we've won for our beast on c5. All right, now an absolute crime from Black. He goes pawn grubbing. No, no, my friend, not what you want to do, because we own the dark squares and the value of the initiative goes up. And what I mean by that is if you wanted to talk about, say, material. For example, normally we say a pawn is worth 3 tempi. Well, a pawn is going to be worth less than 3 tempi when you have opposite sides castling, an attack going, and in positions where we have opposite color bishops. And in fact, we could talk about how this is all of those opposite sides castling, opposite squared bishops, and an attack in this position. Sensible looking move. You felt you were close to winning. I say it's got to be true. And here you overlook queen e5 for the second time. And you correctly say bishop b6, and he's got to be toast. Got to be toast, yeah. So now he gets to castle, rook he1. And here's where I think Black misunderstands the situation here. Okay, bishop b6. One thing that's instructive about this game is, obviously both sides have made some inaccuracies. That's the way these things go. But the thing that's tricky about this position psychologically is that Black now plays this move. And I'm going to say that's a really bad one. It's bad because not only does he surrender the d file, he also makes d7 weak, and it's a tempo. So what should he have done? Well, he should have given you, or at least, give you the opportunity of taking the rook. And this would be painful because I don't think you want to take the rook. And of course, if you don't take the rook, he's going to start pushing his pawns and doing his yada yada. So with e5, if you take it, I don't know if you should, but if you take it, we've got to say he's at least fully in the game, right? Fully in the game. Those beautiful connected passed pawns, and yeah, he can play now. So this, I feel, is a critical mistake, and now you knock him out very nicely. Very nice, simple chess. Kind of a telling thing, he put his pawns on light squares, which really you don't want to do. It doesn't, he's ignoring the fact that you have an attack, and that's the bigger problem. But in general, his pawns should be on dark squares so that his bishop is great and that you can't do your magic on the dark squares. Beautiful move. Ouch. Ouch, ouch, ouch. And he resigns. Let's put the finishing touches here. Snip, slap, and snark. Game over. So very nice game, Stefan. Thanks for being part of the show. Thanks for submitting these over-the-board games. Make us all feel jealous in other parts of the world. Okay, here we go. Say Chess. I'm going to flip it here. Say Chess, I follow on Twitter. And he also has a cool blog out there where he's chronicling his chess progress. I believe he's in Scandinavia, and here he is playing an over-the-board game. Kind of amazing. Again, the people are doing these over-the-board game stuff. And, yeah, let's get into it. C5. I was going to say that he, like me, has some kids, and so I have a natural affinity for anybody like Vishnu that's trying to improve while screaming children are in the house. And this move c3 doesn't work that well against the e6 move order because, well, I don't know, it's not like it's a bad move, but on d5, white is going to have to commit to some kind of business like this if he wants an advantage. You write about ed and d4, but this is a great IQP for black, mostly because the pawn on c3 is blocking the knight on b1. Let's call it equal. Okay, so let's look at what happened. Knight c6 can't be bad, but it's true that bishop b5 gives you something to think about. I think you should just play d5 anyway. Just play d5 anyway, and I'm not sure how white should play that position. Okay, a6, snip, snip, and we have ourselves an interesting pawn moves thrown in. If you consider, for example, what we saw in the World Championship with this position, and then let's say g6 and snap, and then let's say they play dc like in your game. The question I just want to raise is how useful and for whom is it useful that these moves were thrown in? It's not clear, actually. It's not clear that c3 was that helpful for the guy. So let's take a look. I like your decision to play dc, and this thing, by the way, of taking on c6 that came up in the Fabi Magnus match and is now very popular, of course. When I was a kid, it was just thought to be the dumbest thing ever to take on c6 like that. But white is making a very principled claim about how the inflexibility of those pawns is later going to help white out and all this stuff. It's highfalutin. It's highfalutin chess, and it's hard. It's hard for the layman, including myself, to understand. For example, when you play c3, well, your first instinct is to play what white does here and play d4. And maybe, okay, but let's think about it this way, that the black has the asset of this unopposed bishop on c8. Okay, and that's going to be one of the key features of the position. And so white opening the position, not clear to me that he wants to do it. So I'm going to say d4 after d4 black is fine. Could he have done something else? Maybe queen e2 or d3. That might have been more interesting. Okay, here we go. d4. And here, Say Chess, a.k.a. Martin, I want to say this next move is an important mistake. Okay? You don't mention it, and I think it's kind of a big deal. And if you become sensitive to why this is a mistake, I think it'll really help. You took. Now, in the sense that you want to open the position and get rid of your funny pawn and all that, of course, that makes sense. But where the problem with you taking is that you are going to liberate this knight on b1 to come to c3, which is something I think white very much wants. Instead, I think knight f6 would be a fine move. You can play cd whenever you want. We're not afraid of bishop g5, just play bishop e7. We're not afraid of e5 because the pawns don't want to be on dark squares. His pawns don't want to be on dark squares because his bishop is on dark squares too. All right? Okay. So you took, and now you write about how c5 would have been stronger. Okay. So knight f6, knight c3, and again c5, absolutely, and I think you're fine. And instead you play bishop b4. And right, I got distracted from my original plan, so I thought it was interesting to pin and attack e4. Right, and one of the things actually is interesting, and I didn't plan it this way, that we're following the game with Stefan, is there too black played bishop b4 and ended up losing his most important bishop, right? Chiquitas, thank you for the raid. He lost his most important bishop, and that gave him, just incredible grief on the dark squares. And that's what I feel like you're setting yourself up for here too with bishop b4. Okay, so queen c2. And now check out this move. You play h6. Ay, 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 ay. I don't like it. No, I don't like it. Bishop, this is an example where the threat is greater than the execution. Bishop g5 isn't going to slaughter you. But h6 is a clear loss of time. So, castles, castles, a3, snip, snop, and yeah, let's say that white has a nice advantage. And we have ourselves several things going on. Definitely opposite color bishops, and that means that the side with the initiative will have the advantage. Okay, so now it becomes a struggle, and I think this is the way both players should frame it from this position, a struggle to see who will gain the initiative. And because white is better developed, at least intuitively, right, we should say to ourselves, right, yeah, he should be able to get it. Okay, c5. By the way, I didn't plan it this way. We're talking about the Grunfeld structure. And when CD happens, that is what we will get. An interesting version of it. And even the structure we end up getting is seen in a lot of Grunfeld positions as well. Okay, so here I felt this was white's opportunity to start some drama of his own. And at least intuitively, I want him to play e5 and tell you that knight d5 is going to be met by c4, and if you play knight d7, to play a move like queen e4. Simple points that later we want to play queen g4 and start an initiative against your king using our bishop over there. So that's my sense of how white should play it. And in general, he should be looking not to stabilize the position, but to try to knock you out with increasing somehow the scope of his dark square bishop. Again, the problem is that he owns half of the board and you do as well. And the question is, who's going to start the initiative on that half of the board? 32 squares are white and 32 squares are black. Okay, so here we go. Bishop e3, b5, snip. Fateful decision, probably okay, but I don't know if he understood why it was a cool decision, or at least interesting decision. There's a lot of Grunfeld lines where you steal a pawn like this, and the main controversy mostly is he's giving you time, say chess, to do what you need to do on the light squares, right? So let's go ahead and put your first move out there. Great move, and let's just say hallelujah, you're starting your business on the light squares. And he plays knight d2. And you correctly say that knight g4 looks great, where you can start punishing the dark square bishop. Well, let's give you a variation. Looks great, right? I don't know what he's doing. No problems. Okay. And you write white is still better. I don't have any understanding of it. I assume queen c4 is probably also possible here. Okay. I'm going to leave it there, though. And queen c7, f3. Now, let's say some obvious things. This is dominating not only your light square bishop, but of course your knight. And like I said before, in general, white should be striving to put his pawns on light squares, and you should be striving to put your pawns on dark squares. And this harmony that you see with the light pawns helping the dark square bishop, where here the bishop is like the mortar to the bricks of f3 and e4, and also as a wall against the bricks of the wall against these two pieces. So right, we got to say white is good, but he didn't understand it, because on knight d7 he did not play c4, after which I think he would be great, and instead played knight b3. Big mistake, and now the game, loads of things can happen, because he's giving you time and he's giving you access to that beautiful c4 square, where once your knight gets to c4, we got to say all bets are off. Now, you didn't say anything about this move, rook fc8. I don't understand this move, rook fc8. And I think when you get it into your head about the bishop on b7 needing more squares, I think what you say to yourself is, the reason I don't really want to play rook fc8 is, A, Jesse doesn't know what it's doing there, but more importantly, it has a dream of playing at some point f5. Pawns aren't people, and the bishop is a person, and it needs scope. Does that mean you should play f5 now? You could think about it for sure. The more natural move, though, just play knight e5, right? Play knight e5, and if I don't know. I'm not worried about bishop f4, because it's hard to put more pressure on it. Plus, the bishop was doing a great job touching c5. And so, either of those moves would be good. But the main point is the rook, I don't know what it's doing there on c8. Seychelles says, I wanted to get back the pawn. Okay, good. It's a good admission, because the pawn is not your main problem here. The problem is that can the dude start lighting you up on the light squares, and the dark squares, excuse me. And of course here, all these moves, he should be thinking about c4, and knight e5 would stop it. So one thing I want to stress is we're going to get this blockading position here, right? White didn't do c4. This blockading position where the extra pawn, white's extra pawn, not the biggest deal, not the biggest problem in the position. I would say for black, the biggest problem is your bishop is stunted against the pawn on e4, and that's why I want the ability to play f5. Okay, now a little dance happens. Okay, a4, a takes. I thought it was weird that you played bishop takes, but maybe it's not that big of a deal. Anyways, I thought it was weird. Knight d4, and here's an interesting moment where what I think, Martin, you can see about your decision-making process here is that you were obsessed with taking this pawn when that's not the real danger, I'm going to say, right? And you said, I decided the c pawn was better than my e6 pawn. And there I really want to disagree, and hopefully I can explain it. So the first thing to see about this position, I think, is the reason many people have the misapprehension that bishops of opposite color are all drawn positions is that if you get to some position later with all the pieces off, all of them off except the bishops, you will often get a drawn position because the pawns can't advance. And that's still very much true right now of this pawn on c5. It's very hard for him to advance because you own the light squares, right? You own the c6 square. Very tough for him to do anything about that square. In contrast, the problem you have is now when he takes that e6 square, e6 pawn, he's got 4 pawns against 3 against your king, and now he should be laser focused on crushing your king. I said murdering earlier, and somebody liked the way I said it. Cool. Okay. He needs to murder you. Okay. Now, he plays knight f5, and you disagree with it. I'm on board with the disagreement. In particular because his position's so solid, and I don't even know what black's supposed to do to improve his position. Stockfish said something about knight e2. A little weird because the knight's cool on d4, but yeah. There's a variety of ways for white to improve his position, and he should start thinking about crushing you on the king's side. Even moves like, it might look anti-intuitive at first, but a move like g4. g4, king g2, and really start an engine over there on the king's side against your king. Okay, so let's look. Knight f5, snip, and then knight e3, and you gave this an exclam, and at the very least from a practical point of view, I think that is good to note. Here the guy plays queen e2, which I don't like. And, you know, Kostya has been doing a lot of puzzle rush. And I think the puzzle rushers would be, you know, upset that this had, in their beautiful position, had gone to this. But they would have said to themselves, this is a tricky move for a puzzle rush player. And it's also a good move, I think, from a positional point of view. But it's also just tricky. So maybe you can play king f1, but let's just put the king on h1. And the point is that when they play queen c3, you've got this nasty business, rook d8. And if they play rook takes c3, then the narrative, I don't know how true, yeah, then the narrative is that we have more pawns in front of our king, and therefore we should be able to create drama in the long term against the black king. Threats of things like f6, for example. Is white winning? No, I'm not saying that, but there's a very nice chance, especially from a practical level, of giving black grief. Okay, as it was, it went queen e2, knight f5, and Seychelles offered a draw, had less time. Should he have done it? Maybe our ideal chess player wouldn't have offered a draw. It's certainly true, though, that white's dreams have all been crushed. And, you know, if you were playing a strong GM, you'd be a little worried about some bad episode with the Fischer ending of bishop and rook against knight and rook. But one good thing about going over your games is, especially in decisions like this with a draw, is to learn about your own psychology, in the sense that what am I trying to say? That you have all kinds of narratives going into a position like this. In particular, you've been suffering for the last 10 to 15 moves. So that suffering, let's say primes you to just be happy with a draw, right? But by going over your games deeply, you might come to the realization of like, oh, right, on a practical level, even though I was down in time here, I had a chance to outplay this guy because, first of all, there's not that much danger, and I can just make moves. You've got the c6 square at the minimum blockaded, but it looks like you also have the c4 square blockaded. Anyways, you could play on. All right, beautiful. Let's move on to the next business here. And, we have one more, excuse me. We have one more opposite color bishop game. Oh my God, you got to hurry this up, buddy. You got to hurry this up. You've been enjoying games like Vishnu's and everybody else's too much. We're done at 7, my friends. Okay, hold on. So this is also the beginning of our Tarash games. Tarash. And it's kind of cool that there's been filtering down of the Tarash. You know, Kasparov made it popular back in the 80s, and I just recently learned by reading Nikitin's book on that time that they had forced him to play it because they felt, rightly so, that the Tarash was an opening where his open play and calculation skills would really come into effect. And when you think about that, the idea that some wise coaches told Kasparov to play it, it shows you what kind of player right there would thrive under the Tarash. And now, of course, it's different because everything is based with computers and yada yada. If you go back and look at, it was a Sunday Night Fights from 2 weeks ago, me and Kostya were dead wrong about one of Vishnu's positions where he had like deep prep involved. Okay. 7 minutes per segment and we end in time. Okay, yeah, I can't take forever. E3, not a good move. And what we're going to see with these Tarash games is that white plays, let's call them sidelines. And so one cool thing about playing an opening well is to understand those sidelines and just generally what we want to do. And E3 just can't be right because the bishop is stuck. Bishop G4, A3 can't be right. And here, Nimzovich says that the isolated queen pawn has a concupiscence, a lust to expand. And so D4 would be the, let's call it the traditional move, with probably an advantage. Maybe a small advantage, but an advantage. Tricky move. I kind of admired this move. It encourages this mistake, knight d5, and really is saying, well, I want to make sure that the bishop on c1 stays terrible. Now, it's true that queen d5 is complicated and knight e4 is complicated, but what I like about this is even though you had the wrong idea here, i.e. knight e5 looks probably winning in this position, it still was cool in that you've got these weakened light squares over there. And I didn't intend it this way, but it has mild similarities to the Say chess game where, you know, we're down a pawn, but we have some infiltration possibilities over there. Okay, we're going to say that, of course, white is fine, and there's a lot of moves here I don't understand. But I want to just go into this a touch because there's some amazing things that happened. Let's read what you write. I think that black is not worse here. It would be difficult for white to break through on the queen side. Black's bishop is on an active square guarding the flank. Okay, white's pawns are disconnected. White doesn't have an obvious target. All these things are true, and it is true that your next move is indeed a very instructive mistake. After which you're going to feel so guilty that you call your position lost. And it's definitely hard. And I have some question marks of my own about how to evaluate it. Show the board, show the board. How many times? You know, guys, I need a new way of doing this. I need a new way of doing this. Iberix, I have to say, I really appreciate the purple. I appreciate the purple. Because if you hadn't done the purple, I might not have looked over. I do it so often, you guys. I do it so often. But the good news is we are in the position that is the most interesting for our purposes. Pawns are not important or as important as they normally are in these bishops of opposite color. And the reason has everything, as we've talked about, to do with the initiative. For example, if you put the rook on d8, there's no way you're going to lose because white will eventually have to trade the rooks, and that's just completely dead drawn. That is an example of how the bishops of opposite colors will be totally drawn. And that's right, it was intended as blindfold training. Okay, so the thing to watch out for is making your opponent's pieces active. And so this next series of moves is very instructive. What is white's only attempt at being active? To attack the f7 square, right? Okay, so this is the way it goes down. Black thought that pawns were people, and all of a sudden, it's so bad that Mamsiek says, and I am lost here. My king and rook are bounded defending f7, and I cannot move anything. Now, I think that's too much. I don't know. I don't know if you're lost here, but I'm suspicious of you being lost here just because you truly have just one weakness. It is true, though, that it's pretty bad, and it's instructive that it's pretty bad. One thing I want to stress is that, okay, let's say, first of all, what you should have done. You don't want to be playing b5 because the pawn doesn't mean anything. It's truly over. It's blockaded on the b3 square and it's going nowhere. In fact, putting the pawn on b4 just restricts your own bishop. So what did we need to do? Probably either g6 or g5. Let's play g6 because it's principled in the sense that we need to put the pawn on a light square. Now, what are we intending? Well, we want to get out of dodge. Eventually, we're going to sack the pawn on f7, right? Okay. So, white, in turn, in order to crack us, needs to have the pawn on e5. Now, the problem for him is the second he plays e4, he's giving our bishop something to do. And so, the second he gives our bishop something to do, then we can start dreaming of the escape scenario where our king goes somewhere else, maybe h6, for example, and we play rook c8, right? And then get our own play, whether it's on d2 or c2, depending on how things shake out, right? So, is it difficult? Yes. Is it difficult? Yes. And it's a great example, a really good example of an opposite color ending where the initiative and the activity of the bishops are just incredibly strong. Okay, I need to well, actually, let me just clarify a comment. 5-card draw says, Jesse's saying pawns are not important and Philidor turning in his grave. Let me clarify, actually. I think me and Philidor actually have a lot in common. When I say pawns are not people, I am not saying they're not important. what I'm saying is that the pawns are the scenery in which the careers of the pieces develop, right? So a change in pawn structure really always affects the valuation of the pieces. And when Philidor and others talk about the pawns being the soul of chess, what they're kind of saying is not that pawns are people, but the pawns are the things that set the stage for the lives of our pieces. Imagine it as a metaphor for life. There are certain types of people who will thrive only in certain situations. For example, in my generation, the kids who were good with computers and math were suddenly the kings of the universe. This did not happen before. This is a totally new thing. And so that shift in the world is comparable to a shift in pawn structure. Similarly, we have a number of positions. We go basically every game that I go over, we see a shift in pawn structure. And then we have the change in the valuation of the pieces. And when those last examples we're looking at with bishops of opposite color and the initiative and opposite sides attack and castling, there all I'm trying to say is that the value of the pawns in those positions goes down. Okay, here we got Ricker going on, another Tarash defense. Ricker did not have a sense of how to play this position. I apologize in advance for going over this game a little quick, but I need to go a little quick. E3, not the right move. G3, pretty standard. And not the end, though. Bishop B5. I'd rather see Bishop E2. Okay, Rook E1. I'd rather see some kind of motion, Ricker, for you to fix your bishop on C1. And let's use this as a basic opportunity to talk about the IQP. Isolated queen pawn. It's a dynamic weakness, and in particular what you see in a position like this is it's a bully in the center, and it's making life difficult for one or more of your pieces, in particular your bishop on c1 in this position. It's making it hard for the bishop to do stuff. Even if you get the bishop on b2, it's hard for your knight on c3 to get out of the way, because the pawn on d5, it's the only center, the big fat center pawn, so it's controlling the squares that the knight might want to go to. And as we saw in the last game, it might be used to plant the knight on e4. So that's the one I want you to feel bad about, Ricker, Rook e1, because it's not clear what you're doing. Rook e8. And I think, even though this is a tactical mistake that you make here, Ricker, I think it's born of the frustration of not knowing what to do with your bishop. And let's just show it. You play knight e5. And so let me stress that even if you weren't dropping a pawn here, I still wouldn't want you to play the move, because you're playing with your pretty pieces in a lot of ways, and it's your bishop on c1 that's got to get into the game. Let's pay attention, for example, to Rook a1. By the way, everybody, this is sub-September. Give ChessDojo some love, some subs. You can gift people subs. It's all at a discount for just one more day. Okay. Known unknown. I'm sorry I didn't quite get to your question. But your suggestion of playing g5 and then king g7, g6, I like it a lot. The danger there is just that you're putting your king on a light square, and you will still come under attack, but very much something to consider in that position. Okay, so that's the crime, Ricker. And now you're on a theoretical level, whatever you want to call it, you're lost, but I want you to see that here you do have a potentially great piece, and its name is bishop c1. So you got to play b3 here. You got to fix your bad piece. And you wrote e4 as an idea. And right, at the very least, is what you should be thinking about, fixing your piece. You got to fix him. All right, bishop e2. I don't like it. Notice you're not fixing your piece. I'm sure he had better moves, but okay. Now you finally fix him, but it's like now also your position is a little bit falling apart, in particular your king. D4, good move. Now I'm going to say you're probably lost. I'm not thrilled with B6, but okay. I'm not thrilled with F5. I don't know why he's not playing Queen E7. And there it is. He's got the brutal pin on our pawn. And let's say the obvious, Ricker, your bishop on A3 is terrible. In fact, it could be argued that the biggest problem in this position is not that you lost a pawn and you're going to lose another one. The biggest problem is your bishop on A3 is so poor. Snip. We're trying. It's a little late, right? Boom. Probably a good move, right? C4. Very nice. Simple and strong. You played a monster here. Oh, knight C4. Man, this guy was using a computer, Ricker. Come on. Now, this guy's playing monster moves. Okay. Yeah, we lost a piece. All right. So, Rickard, listen. Simple lessons, okay? Isolated queen pawn and fix your bad piece. Feel it in your soul when you've got a bad piece and just say to yourself, gotta fix it. Do I need to sack a pawn to do it? Absolutely. All right. Hick and Nunc, also known as Here and Now. Here we go. This was an interesting one. Another Tarash defense. Right, as I said, we're dealing with some sidelines of the Tarash here now. B3, bishop B2. Fine, this was definitely one of the old school ways of playing against the Tarash. Interestingly, Kostya likes likes to play against the isolated queen pawn in kind of a way that involves tendencies, wrong tendencies, I'd like to say. All right, so interesting position. And we've, like a lot of these Tarash positions, they can transform into different structures. And the key thing to say, obviously, or I think it's obvious, is that you have some beautiful light squares and an unopposed bishop on G2. I don't, in principle, like this move, bishop H3. It's the kind of move that maybe the computer would be cool with, but I want you to play knight D2 and E4 very quickly. And bishop H3 is kind of like a fancy pants thing that I'm not thrilled with. We should note that black has very simple notions in a position like this. Castle, put the rook on the F file, obviously, so he gets that move for free. And just keep his center as stable as possible with these beautiful knights and play bishop C5. Yeah, so black has his own ideas, and so it's really going to be about speed. And I'm guessing something like knight D2, castles, E4, and I'm going to say I'd rather be white in this position, mostly because that unopposed light square bishop looks strong to me. Loads of things black could consider. Bishop C5, rook A D8. I don't like D4 too much because he gives me the light squares. Okay, let's look. Knight D2. There are other moves possible. Little slow, but okay. Bishop C5, very good move, and that's why rook C1 would have been nice in your previous move to prevent this. Bishop C5. E4, better late than never. You say trying to complicate the game. I think it's something that you wanted to do from the very beginning. Now that was a weird move to me. There's so many weird like tactics I feel like he's opening himself onto when he plays Queen D6. Queen F7 felt a lot more natural to me. And here, for example, you went back. I didn't understand, like, I guess, right, his intention is if B4, he's going to have to do that because bishop B6, knight C4, right? But let me just say, in general, I don't think you. This is a weird thing. Later on, you give bishop d4 an exclam mark. I love his bishop on d6 or c5. I think that's a great piece, and it's looking at f2 and holy moly, let's play queen f7 and keep attacking the guy. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And maybe actually, if I try to crawl inside of white's head or black's head a little bit, maybe queen d6 is I guess the notion is that he wants to stop e5, but I don't think you want to play e5. No way, you don't want to close the position off. And this would now turn into what looks to me like a beautiful French if he had done it this way. Okay, so we're going to end the game, the session today with 2 Frenches that went bad. So that's we have looking forward to more French stuff. All right, so there it was, bishop d4, snip, 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 snip. Do I think you're a little better? I do. Because of the bishop, because of the better king. b4, a little weird to me. I don't understand why not knight f3. Okay, so knight e4, snip, rook e1, queen f6, rook a2, knight f3, bishop takes, and here I'm sorry I'm going a little fast, but I have a couple more games to look at. Here, instructive mistake. The guy should play ef3, no questions asked, and the simple reason is, in the heavy ending, the better king is just a huge asset, and after ef3, white's king is going to be under continual problems for the rest of time. Queen f3, oh, now white's no problem at all. Some trades happen. And now, God, I'm going to apologize for going so fast, because now we have this really interesting ending where, my sense is that black should hold, but it's definitely close, and I think black's next move is shocking. Okay, so b5, weird, and you write, and I think this is an instructive rook endgame position. By the way, on CoChess, aka Chess24, I'm doing a rook ending boot camp. I don't know if it's already been full up. It's 10 people. But this would be actually the kind of position that I would want to look at. And the point is, and let's just put it in BA, because I think that's maybe more natural, is that with a move like rook a2, it's going to be very difficult for white to make progress. In particular, in order to make progress, the king is going to have to come on a journey. Once the king goes on a journey, it's going to be hard to defend these pawns from the attacks of this king. And so we can imagine the king going all the way over there, winning the rook, but then losing these pawns, even one of them, and then black gets enough counterplay to draw, sometimes even win. So that's, in a nutshell, the reasons for black to feel comfortable in a position like this. Instead, black goes a little wacky here, and it's a miracle that he survives. Rook e5, a weird move. We're going to see, though, he has an intention. King f8. And fascinating to me is that he gets away with what he gets away with. And I wish I had more time to talk about it. I actually had spent some time looking at this endgame because it shocked me so much. Now, you say king f2 was a mistake. I can't believe that's a mistake. And you write that rook a7, rook b5, rook a4 is still in time. And the rook on a4 here is so terrible that it's hard for me to believe that you have chances in this position. And instead, like you say, you miss this move, but it's like, really? And I mean, let me put it this way. The position from the very beginning is probably drawn for black. Of course, you should fight on about it. But this one, where he goes to the pawn ending, he doesn't know it's drawn. He might think it's drawn, but there's a lot of calculation going on here that he's subjecting himself to. The rook ending, that earlier one with the rook on a2, that's the kind of thing that he could play with a conceptual understanding. Here, though, he has to calculate it, and it's totally unclear to me that it's going to work out. We dance a little bit, and then we take. King e3. And now I spent some time on this, but there's no rush to go to the queenside pawns yet. And something like h4 would be interesting, because it's going to be a race. You're going to have to organize the situation where you sack those pawns and then run to the king side. I wish I had more time. In the end, it was a draw, going back and forth in a position like this. Okay. Apologies. I got to move on. All right, we got 2 more games. Let's look at them from the black point of view. I have seen this very system with knight b3. It's nothing special, but all of these systems go back to the Labordonnais-McDonald match of like 1830, whatever it is. And white attains massive space. Knight b3 is playable. I agree with you that a5 should probably be played. But cd is okay. The guy, though, let's call it the principled approach from him would be to now play cd himself. Why is the whole setup weird? Because the knight on b3 is weird. So when you took on d4, you solved his weird knight problem. And the problem for him, really, of taking with the knight was that it gave you this square. And just on a principled level, these positions in the French where you get to play knight c5 are totally fine for you, because you've got counterplay on these, your knight's looking in there, and you probably will drop the knight into e4 at some point, and maybe f5 to support it. Okay, so terrible things happen. Probably we shouldn't have done that, because he's correctly playing this move. Very nice. I always get his name confused. It's not McConnell. I think it's McDonald. Played something like these ideas way back 1830s. It's hard to imagine. And the idea is to crush you with space. And indeed here, I think white has got a very nice position. And I disagree with that move, bishop e3. I want him to play bishop d3 first. I don't understand the point of bishop e3 yet. Bishop d3, I'm assuming, threatens bishop h7, followed by knight g5 and a whole party on the light squares. So I'm going to call it a lost tempo. And also the ability for you to start dreaming of tactics with knight e5 later. So there's the tempo. King h2. I didn't like it on principle. I wanted him to start hurting you with things like bishop c2 and queen d3. Controversial, because his guys aren't ready yet. Okay. Rook g1. I like it a lot. In principle, this is what you should be looking for. Boom. Thank you very much. And now knight c4, which I wasn't 100% sure about, especially because I'm assuming bishop h4 here is possible. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's probably playable. Bishop h4, if queen h3, bishop f2. Maybe I'm wrong on that. In any case, this position was fascinating, and I'm not thrilled with that. But let's start here. And let me read what you wrote. From the terrible position I had from the opening, I think it was turning up better for me. I totally agree. Or at least I thought so. The engine claims I have an advantage, but I think the side with the rook is easier to play with. The important question here is, should I have given up the bishop pair? I think had I kept the pair, it would have been easier to proceed. I totally agree. And let's talk about this a little bit. What white is dreaming of and gets in this game is this situation where the rook versus the bishop is just an absolute beast when the bishop doesn't have any friends. The bishop needs friends to cover the squares that it can't control, right? So we could have included this in the opposite color bishop ending, really, because the bishop on c6 is a beautiful piece. It's actually not on c6 yet, but the light square bishop is a beautiful piece. And you have every right to play for a win here. White has played several inaccurate moves, and for me, this move, queen c6, maybe I'm missing something. I'm just afraid now that I'm missing something. It does look very powerful. The move I'm worried I'm missing is maybe he's nailing me with rook takes f6. In any case, as long as we can stop that, I think we're doing grand. I wish I had more time. I would spend some time on rook takes f6. But right, the problem, you're absolutely right, is now it's scary with that big fat rook. And you, of course, still had chances, though here it's looking really bad. And right here, this endgame, he's cleverly covering all his light squares. And I assume now it's all over. Ends up winning on time. Okay, one more. We're a little bit out, and then we'll be out of here. I apologize for going a little bit fast on these final games. This is all Vishnu's fault. As in a lot of things in life, it's Vishnu's fault. Alexander McDonald, that's right. Okay, here we go. So a6, I said it's a French. It will turn into a French. My understanding, Tim, is that you are correct that c3 is the way to play against a6. And now, right, if he takes, which we're going to call a mistake taking, you have got an amazing French after d5. Anyway, I guess he's not forced to play d5. And him taking on d4, we should say, is the same mistake that Chess made earlier by helping the knight on c3. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here. So, e5, great move. And what we're going to say here is that you have an advanced French with two important advantages. One is you're up a tempo in that I don't think a6 helps black that much. And two, your knight now, because black committed this trade, gets the c3 square. And that is a very big deal because the game plan is going to be simple now when you play this position. Stabilize d4 and then wreck him in terms of space and your side of the board, which is the king's side. And all that comes mostly true in this game, though there's some inaccuracies. I would have preferred knight c3 first instead of bishop d3, by the way. But there it is. Same mistake that we saw. Am I going to get in Traunish's game, Stefan's game, where the guy is going to give up his bishop, his dark square bishop. Actually, also in Chess's game, also gave up his good bishop. Okay. Actually, in this game, he doesn't necessarily give it up, but why put it on b4 if you're not going to take it? All right, now this one, I want to criticize this a3 move. You are putting it to it, do you really, like the question is in, do you really want to give up the dark square bishop? But what you're actually doing is helping the bishop move to a more active square. I still love your position, but it's definitely a more active square. So it would have been better, I think, to do things like castle and knight e2, after which you are completely consolidated on the one weak point. Black has no counterplay, and then you work to mate him. Simple as that. Okay, you're still doing great. I don't like bishop c2. I still want you to play something like knight e2. The bishop on c2 is loose on the c file. Bishop b2, very classic idea in the advanced French, but of course, if we could have avoided it, which I think we could have, it would have been cool to keep him on this nice diagonal for mating black on the king side. I'm assuming here that you missed bishop f5, knight d5. Looks good. But now we get knight e2. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And you're killing him. This is just absolute murder. This is what French players... Look at that, rook f7. And, you know, you probably didn't even have to take it. You know, total disaster for the guy. This is what it looks like. Bang. Just simple chess now. When they say the French is a terrible thing, this is what they're talking about. Yeah, time to resign. So, 2 terrible Frenches to finish us off. And I will post the video on YouTube soon-ish. And I'll try to fix my technical glitches. I do it all the time. I think it wasn't that long, my technical glitches, you know, and maybe I can do something about it. Thank you for the show. I will put up a link to the new show in the YouTube box. It will be up on chess.com as well. If you Google my name and chess.com or go to the forums and type my name in, you will also find it there. And so hopefully I'm going to come back to Road to 2500 soon, but this show will return as a tentative date. We're going to say the tentative date for next show is going to be October 28th, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay. Resignation should have been considered. Well, I am going to resign right now. Thank you, everybody. I will see you soon. Bye-bye.